So so we'll start officially. We're going to talk today again about the proposed Pacifica bylaws.
Yeah, hey, what's up?
Last week we heard from Jan Goodman and the New Day Pacifica campaign on why they think that
Oh my,
that's the thing with
I wasn't invited, so
Pacifica.
I didn't. Yeah.
And and today we're going to hear from Tracy Rosenberg. She's with KPFA, and I'm going to introduce her to you guys. Tracy has worked as Media Alliance's executive director since 2007. She has organized and advocated for a free, accountable, and accessible media system focusing on the protection and sustainability of alternative media outlets, monitored the mainstream media for accuracy and fair representation, and facilitated the training of numerous citizens groups in effective communications. Tracy currently sits on the board of the Alliance for Community Media Western Region, serves on the Anchor Committee of the Media Justice Coalition, and co-coordinates Oakland Privacy, the Bay Area surveillance coalition that works regionally to defend the right to privacy and enhance public transparency and oversight. She has served KPFA and Pacifica as KPFA's program coordinator, as a local election supervisor, and as a public foundation board member from 2010 to 2013. Since 2014, she has published Pacifica in Exile, a blog about Pacifica Foundation governance. It can be found at pacificainexile.org. And I'm going to put that in the chat so everyone can have access to that. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Tracy. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks so much, everyone, for coming and being interested in hearing on both sides of this subject. I really want this to sort of answer your questions, so I'm going to say a couple of things, but I'm hoping that we'll have some time for some back and forth. If I'm telling you anything that you already know, I'm sorry. I'm just going to try to kind of set the stage with a little bit of background and history in terms of sort of how we got here. And then I'll talk about sort of what these new bylaws would do and what I think are some of the clear downsides of that. It's important to say that Pacifica's old bylaws are 47 pages and the new ones are 58 pages, the proposed ones. So I'm not going to get into every in and every out because we would be here all day. So I very much, am depending on your questions to kind of target the specific changes that you're most interested in and focused on. I'm going to mention kind of a couple, but I'm not going to go through 58 pages of line by line. This is changing and that's changing and so on, because we would be here all day. So just in terms of background, as I think everyone knows, Pacifica's democratic bylaws and new governance structure came about in the period 1999 to 2002. That was a period of sort of turbulence in Pacifica history that was basically kicked off by an occupation of the station that is my hometown station, KPFA, which was surrounded by security guards and ripped off the air with programming piped in from Texas. And we had basically police lined up outside the station. We couldn't go inside. And this sort of state of siege lasted for 3 weeks in July of 1999. And it was followed by a similar sort of aggression towards the New York station in 2000, which was called the Christmas coup, happened in December of 2000. And in a whole series of sort of actions that sort of came out of that, which included, thousands of people taking to the streets all over the country, Pacifica was able to do something that in the history of sort of nonprofit organizations has almost never happened, which is it petitioned the Attorney General of the state of California, where the Pacifica Foundation is headquartered, to let it basically by fiat change its bylaws from a non-membership organization to one where each and every person who donated $25 or more was a member of the organization and was bestowed with voting rights about the governance of the organization. If anyone sort of studies nonprofit law, it's extremely difficult to be able to sort of turn yourself from one organization into the other if the legitimate board of directors doesn't voluntarily want to do it, which was what the case was in Pacifica. So in this very sort of, rare historical occurrence, the California AG stepped in and said, I'm going to do it for them. And I think it's important to understand that that will literally never happen again. It's a once in a lifetime kind of thing. And so Pacifica's sort of status as a democratically run organization is rare, precious, unusual, and not something that we can sort of pick up and put down casually. Okay, so a couple of other background things. In 2001, as we all know, the World Trade Center ceased to exist. And in 2005, Pacifica's New York station, the WBAI, which you will hear much about in sort of the New Day context, came to the end of its lease on studio space, or I'm sorry, not studio space, antenna space at the World Trade Tower. I'm sorry, at the Empire State Building. When the World Trade Tower was up and running, there was a competitive situation for antenna space in the area. Once the World Trade Center fell down, Empire State Building pretty much had all the antenna space. And like any capitalist, when they were sitting on sort of a monopoly market, they took advantage of it. So they basically said to everyone who had to sort of renew their lease during this period, you're going to have to sign a very long-term lease, and you're going to have to sign it on these terms. And the terms were terrible. It was a 15-year lease. Started out expensive. It pretty much doubled their antenna prices right from the get-go. And then it went up 8% per year. By the end of that lease, which would have ended in 2020, WBAI would have been paying approximately $70,000 per month for their antenna. And to be clear, there is no other Pacifica station that pays more than $10,000 a month. So it was literally 7 to 8 times what any other Pacifica station has ever had to pay. And if you take a look at your own budgets and think about $75,000 a month, you understand that basically that sort of ongoing expense is almost impossible to meet in a listener-supported radio environment. However, in 2005, nonetheless, it was signed. I assume that the people involved kind of thought, well, we'll sign it in 2005, and by 2020, we'll renegotiate it or something. I don't know. But the predictable thing happened. The New York station paid the bills, not easily, for the first 5 to 7 years. And in the second 5 to 7 years, they weren't able to. So this debt built up. And that debt, which is sort of, constantly referred to as an example of why things aren't working, has not only weighed down the New York station, it's weighed down all of the stations. In 2018, it was finally ended. BAI moved out to the 4 Times Square, which is a shorter tower in Manhattan. They cut their rent. It is now 25% of what it was. They are paying approximately $12,000 a month. But that debt, that unpaid portion of that $70,000 per month that they could not pay, essentially piled up for a number of years and is now a $3.1 million loan, and that's the FJC loan that everyone talks about. It's now been extended until 2022 in terms of payment. I believe it's November 2022, and it may be possible to refinance at that point. No one knows, but it's a big financial burden. That's where it comes from. It's currently not held, of course, by the Empire State Building. It's held by a philanthropic foundation called FJC in New York City. And if you have to be in debt, you want to be in debt to a philanthropic foundation, not to a predatory real estate capitalist empire. Okay, so that's sort of what got us here. In 2019, the Pacifica, well, I don't want to say the Pacifica National Board because that's not right. The Pacifica executive director by the name of John Verneel was apparently stressed out about the constant reading coming out of New York City. And he launched kind of a redo of 1999. He occupied that station. He did so without asking the Pacifica National Board first. He just did it unilaterally, told one or two board members, and it was the same kind of thing. People showed up with security, they locked all the employees out of the station, and they piped in programming, this time from California to New York City. It was really a replay of the 1999 phenomenon. And as you can expect, the folks in New York City said, what happened to my station? Where did it go? And eventually the Supreme Court of the state of New York reversed this takeover, basically saying, look, this is a democratic organization and the employee didn't get proper authorization from the board before they went in and did this. So the difference between 1999 and 2019 is that proper authorization was required because it's a democratic organization. That was not so much the case 23 years ago. This is our second sort of bylaws revision proposal. And the first thing that I sort of want to say is that I think most people would agree that if you have 47 pages of bylaws, that is 20 pages too much. In other words, there are plenty of ways in which these bylaws could and should be simplified that wouldn't be controversial at all. The problem is that each of these proposals comes with all of this bad stuff sort of piled up into this sort of streamlining effort. Because as you know, you can sort of streamline something, or you can use streamlining something as an excuse to do a number of other things. So the previous bylaws proposal, which was defeated by the members by a 2-to-1 margin, it was about a 67% no to 33% yes vote, approximately, was sort of a blunt instrument. It basically sort of threw out all of the member elected governance and just said, let's just appoint people. Let's just go to people who are luminaries in the field, ask them to be on our board, and then they can pick all the board members going forward. Let's go back to this sort of self-selecting model. And of course, that's what caused all of the trouble in 1999. That proposal, which basically gave you a list of, I think it was 12 people that would be appointed to the board and would be the board, period, was sort of a bluntly anti-democratic proposal. It just basically said that sort of having internal accountability between the board and the donors had failed, and we're just not going to have any. And the listeners, they said no. So then we got to sort of New Day, which was sort of the same folks going back and saying, okay, that didn't work, so we have to come back with something that sounds more democratic. So it's kind of a complex structure, but what it basically does is it asks you to select 4 people who have basically been chosen for you to be the sort of starter officers for the Pacifica National Board. And this would happen instantaneously if you vote yes. Jan Goodman, who spoke to you last week, would be one of those board members. She would, I think, be the vice chair of the board. And this would be until 2024, couldn't be changed. And then there are 3 other folks. Like Jan, 2 of the others have already been national board members for periods of several years and would basically be coming back. And one of them, Sharon Kyle, is the editor of an online blog in Los Angeles called the LA Progressive, and has never been involved with Pacifica governance in any particular way, although I think she's been a supporter of KPFK for a number of years. She would become the brand new board president for 3 years. Around this sort of edifice, there would be kind of this complicated structure with national elections all over the place. There would be one at each station, each of the 5 stations, for a single solitary listener rep instead of the 4 that people currently send. So it would just be one from each station. Then there would be a nationwide election for one person to represent all 100 or so paid staff all over the country. And then one person to represent all 1,000 or so unpaid staff or volunteer staff. Pacifica calls them unpaid staff. And it's important to say that the unpaid programmers produce the majority of the programming in Pacifica. There are 10 times as many of them as paid staff. And in a lot of cases, they've been with the network producing their programming for years and years. So they're people that, you know, have skin in the game. And so the word volunteer doesn't always accurately describe how invested they are in the organization, but they are not on the payroll. After that, there would be 3 people who would be appointed, selected by the rest of the board, supposedly for some set of skills or interests or abilities that they possessed. And this would be the board. The local boards, which have basically been the pipeline by which people sort of became involved in the governance of their stations and then sort of went on to the national board after serving on a local board, would basically be turned into cabs. And those of you that have radio stations know what a cab is. Basically, it's sort of like a CPB model for a community advisory board, which is just a bunch of folks that basically take input from the community about what the programming should be like. But by CPB regulations, they don't really participate in the operations of the station. So a number of things that the local boards are now charged with doing, which includes evaluating the station's manager and its GM, taking a look at the station's budgetary allocations, reviewing diversity and inclusion issues. All of that stuff is sort of removed from local control, and now it's all national, and it's all done nationally by an entity that may only have 1 out of 12 people from that station area who sort of understands that local area. So basically, the sort of the grassroots grounds, you know, from the ground up, sort of local aspect of Pacifica's democratization would be gone. Part of sort of the dynamics that are important here is that Pacifica has 2 fairly large stations, and they're both in California, one in Northern California, one in Southern California. Both of those stations are substantially larger at this point than the other 3, which are located in New York, Houston, and Washington. The New York station used to be somewhat larger than it is, but it is now in sort of that smaller quadrant of stations. And, you know, as I think people can understand, it's a very different thing to operate a station with a $3.5 million budget and 50 or so employees than it is to operate a station on a 1.5 million budget with like 6 to 10 employees. So you have stations that function extremely differently, all sort of in this one kind of umbrella or network. And that can sometimes be kind of complicated because if you come from one of those environments, it can be difficult to understand the other environment in terms of how you have to do things. Additionally, and I think this is fair to say, the East Coast stations have traditionally been much more oriented towards audiences of color, Black and brown folks. Specifically, WPFW has a history of catering to connoisseurs of jazz music and to the Black community in DC. And BAI has traditionally been tied into Black communities in New York, while the West Coast stations considerably less so and are maybe more involved with what you would call progressive democratic politics. When you take a look at the Houston station, you there have sort of an area of change where the station has been very vitally involved with the local music community and is now undergoing a significant amount of stress by some of the demographic changes in Houston and in Texas, which the station is kind of struggling to respond to. So I'm going to kind of stop there and just see if you guys have questions or things that you would like me to talk about a bit more in terms of what the changes are. And then I will give you a couple of minutes of why I think that they're bad.
Thank you, Tracy. Does anyone want to start off with questions?
Or comments, either or.
Or comments?
I mean, does that feel like an accurate description of the changes, or is anything that I'm saying contradictory in terms of what the changes are to what you heard last week? Or have you all fallen asleep?
Tracy, it's just so complicated, and you've done a great job, I think, of summarizing as concisely as possible. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot to follow. I think my primary question, I'll have more, I'm sure, as we go along, but my first question is, how serious is this proposal of the new bylaws? Do you have any way to gauge, is there a big, can you tell at all? Because, how many people are going for this, or I just can't tell from over here.
Right.
I just don't know if you have any
okay. Well, we can't tell either, but I'll say a couple of things. These kinds of bylaws changes are generally put forward by a membership petition, and that's what happened here. The petition has 5,000 signatures. Pacifica has about, I think it's now around 48,000 members. So 5,000 is a sampling. It's substantial. It's certainly nowhere near a majority of the membership. It is sort of, relevant to say that the petition that started the last series of bylaws revisions had only 1,000 signatures on it. So certainly there have been more this second time around. In terms of, how likely it is to win, I generally think it is probably somewhat unlikely, but it only takes a majority vote. Pacifica members are not required to vote. We don't have a voting mandate. So of those 48,000 people, a percentage will vote, somewhere probably higher than 10% and lower than 20%. And if you take a look at that number, and people that want this change will be highly motivated to vote, there's a potential problem there, because I think people that don't want to change to go forward are generally going to be the apathetic ones, right? If you want it to happen, you will vote. If you don't want it to happen, then you have to be motivated to cast that no vote. So I think there's definitely a challenge, and I wouldn't say that it is no threat or impossible, if that makes any sense. In terms of why, I think there's two reasons. One is that it's impossible to argue that Pacifica's bylaws shouldn't be somewhat simplified. They absolutely should be. And I'd be the last person in the world to try to say, no, they, every word is etched in stone and it should never be changed. I don't believe that. So I think that there's a certain sort of, people saying, well, this is the second bylaws proposal. If we keep voting no, then we'll never get that simplification. And I think people kind of feel like, well, where's the good bylaws streamlining proposal? And my answer to that is, well, if we could stop this sort of barrage of bad ones, then we could write a good one, right? And it probably wouldn't even be contested. But unfortunately, we have this sort of internal dynamic going on where people are, putting forward these bad ideas repeatedly, basically trying to wear people down, in my opinion. That's an opinion statement there, but but that's what I kind of think is going on. Yeah. So, so I think people are kind of like, well, I have to sign something to change the bylaws, right? Sooner or later. The other thing, of course, and I'm sure that Jan talked about this, is, the loan and the fear about what's going to happen when the loan becomes payable. And it's important to say that the loan was originally payable in April of 2021, and that deadline came and passed, and it was extended for 18 months with no penalty. So I think that we should be clear is, I'm sure the foundation wants to get paid at some point, but they certainly seem willing to work with us and to, try to find a solution to the problem. So I don't think, screaming, oh my God, the world is going to come to an end when the loan is due. It was a chicken little kind of thing in April of 2021. And I don't see that that's any different in November of 2022. Although Pacifica does need to take some action to try to pay back at least some of the money. But I don't think that we should assume that, the whole thing is going to fall into the edge of the sea when the loan is due. And, my basic comment here, which is that bylaws don't make $3 million drop on your head. You can change the bylaws all you want. And there may be reasons to do that and reasons not to do that, but to pay back a loan is not a reason to change the bylaws. It's not going to cause that to happen.
Ursula had her hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. The only issue I would take with your history is that it actually started before KPFA. Before KPFA was occupied, Houston and Washington, D.C. had already been had a forced change of management. So it was a struggle that started in the 90s, really. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. The question I had wanted to ask you was when Jan spoke last week, as I understood it, one of her major points was that what they were proposing was not only to address the loan issue, but really address dysfunction in the organization. And she, pointed to the fact that we really have not had an executive director stay on longer than a short period of time. And that's something those of us who are employed by the foundation, keenly experience. So I'm curious what the vision is that you're putting forth. Say, if I understand what you're saying is that without interference, the foundation could resolve some of its problems. And then, so I'm curious what way you see forward for that, for addressing the chronic dysfunctions in the organization.
Sure. Well, two things. Firstly, Ursula is entirely right. There's a long history in the 1990s that led to those dramatic events. And I was just condensing for the sake of not talking forever. But she's absolutely right. And of course, nothing dramatic happens without a long, slow buildup before.
Right.
So, absolutely. I would start off by saying that with the situation of executive directors, it's important to understand that a number of executive directors did not leave voluntarily. Some did. A number of them were, shall we say, pooched aside And they were pooched aside because of internal wars within the organization. I mean, there isn't really any other way to say it. A board of directors is, of course, a proxy body in the sense that people vote and they send people to the board to do what their agenda is. And in many cases, we've had sort of an alternating set of executive directors, some of whom were very much reformers and, set off a lot of internal alarm bells, and a number of whom were sort of seen as the opposite, not being willing to sort of make changes that needed to be changed. And whatever side they were on, there was another side that basically didn't want that. So you had kind of a situation where the dysfunction within the organization, not within the board itself, really caused the, there's a joke in sort of Pacifica that it's really hard for people to agree to do something, but it's really, really easy for people to mobilize to stop something. And, I worked at KPFA once as the program coordinator, and every time there was a situation of, 1 hour of programming changing, there was an army that either wanted that change to happen or didn't want that change to happen, or both. And it mobilized, and you had to do battle with that entity if you wanted to make that change. And I think, on a grander level, that really is what has been happening with the executive director position. And I don't think that reshuffling who's on the board is really what solves that. It's an organizational culture issue. And in many cases, I mean, to be clear, it's the employees themselves that have rose up and said, make that ED gone. So it's not the board or the people on the board or how the board is chosen that really causes the organizational culture. So I'm not sure you can really equate those two things. In other words, I think you could pass these New Day bylaws and still have all the exact same problems that you still have with retaining executive directors. I don't think that's where it comes from. In terms of sort of a vision going forward, I mean, that's a longer conversation. And I don't want to sort of, totally go to that place. But I do think that Pacifica has some enormous assets and resources. I mean, number one, you're the only national media infrastructure that still exists in legacy media that's not owned by the government or by corporations. There is nothing else. Secondly, you probably, although they are getting older, and that is a problem, you have an enormously dedicated listener base that is too small, but it's there. And you also have, a programming universe that is kind of broad and deep, and with a little bit of outreach on our part, it would be broader and deeper. The challenges that we face are really very much the changing nature of media, which doesn't have a foothold in this new economy. And which has switched very much to an on-demand kind of model, and Pacifica has been incredibly slow to catch up with that in all kinds of ways. And the problem is that when you fall behind at the beginning, your catch-up processes, especially when you don't have a lot of extra money to invest and you have to pay off stupid antenna loans from years ago, you can't really make up that ground. So I think those are the challenges that the board has to kind of engage with. And I think the answer always is closer ties to the community, because what has kept Pacifica going all of these years is having those wildly loyal audiences. And as that original audience starts to age, those connections have to be rewoven with people that are now in their teens and 20s and 30s. And can support this effort, but they're only going to do it if it feels like it belongs to them. So there is very much a sort of a shift or a reweaving that kind of needs to happen, because a lot has changed since Lou Hill's time, but the basic model that he said, which is basically this is a relationship-based entity. You're talking about listener-sponsored radio. It's about that relationship between programmer and audience, which is partially currency. I mean, you have to support it or it's not going to be there, but it's not just currency. And I think that a lot of those connections are, they're a bit tattered. And to the extent that we can rebuild them, that will be your financial safety net. I've never been a believer that philanthropy will save public media, and I think that we've seen that it hasn't. Local news is pretty much gone. So I think that, in the end, the part of Pacifica that is healthy is the part of it that means a great deal to its members and listeners and donors. And the more that we strengthen that, the better off we're going to be. So I'll stop there, and there's lots more practical things that could be said, but in terms of a vision, I think that is at least something to say.
Let's go to Davine and then Trudy.
So I read some of the history of what's been going on, and my understanding is for around the past 5 years, the accountants have said this can't go on this way. How is, if something doesn't change, how is the entity Pacifica going to handle the dire predictions of the accountants that have been auditing what's going on?
Yeah, actually, the accountants just came out with a letter on the occasion of finishing the 2019 audit, and they will be finishing the 2020 audit by June 30. And they said specifically that a significant amount of work has been done in the past couple of years to stabilize Pacifica's finances, and that they are considerably more optimistic than they are when they began working with us. And I believe this auditor started on the 2017 audit, which I believe they started working on in 2018. So basically the trajectory over the past 3 to 4 years, according to the current auditor, is upwards. And they're basically saying that, yes, they came into, I think, what you could politely call a catastrophe, but that the board has done a significant amount of positive work to stabilize things, and there are significant improvements. I believe that a copy of that letter is on the front page at pacifica.org. If it isn't, I think I can probably get a hold of it and make it available maybe to Ursula. So the thing of we can't go on is really kind of, to some degree, old news, although there are always significant financial stresses and they don't disappear. But the trajectory, according to the auditor, and it's the same auditor we've had now for 4 years, is currently at the moment, according to the auditor, significantly improved from where it was a couple of years ago.
Cool, thank you. And we'll go to Trudy.
Hi, Tracy. Last week, of course, and kind of you mentioned it as well. What is the gridlock between what the directors are doing, what the board is doing now, and Jan mentioned that there was this gridlock in which no decisions were being made, and that if she were to, if the board were to be streamlined, then decisions could be made. But decisions about what? What are the issues?
Well, I mean, that's kind of a vague comment by Jan. She is off the board currently. She termed out after 6 years, or 5 years, whatever the term out period is. Anyway, she was on the board for a while, and she got to the end of her term, so she's not on it currently. From what I can see, the board has made a bunch of significant decisions over the past couple of years. And as I mentioned, the auditor has kind of echoed that and said that, important changes were happening and decisions were being made. So no, I don't think you have a situation of gridlock. I do think that a 22-person board is large, and it often leads to a lot of very long discussions, and that this can be really debilitating. And there are probably some pretty good arguments for getting the board down in size to maybe a 15-person board or a 14-person board. That said, you can do that without all of these other new day changes that are being plopped on. As I said, you could do a simple streamlining. Instead of sending 4 people from each station, you could send 3 people from each station, and then you'd have a 15-person board with some affiliate reps. So it's not sort of, necessary to strip local control and install pre-selected officers and do all of these other things just in order to have a smaller, more streamlined board. And I don't know why, the proposals have come sort of, larded with all of this extra stuff. But in terms of gridlock, I mean, no, there's not gridlock. Finally, as soon as it was possible, and I tried to do this when I was on the board, but the Empire State Building wasn't having it. But when it was possible in 2018, the WBAI antenna was moved out of the Empire State Building, saving about $1.9 million for the last couple of years of the contract, 2018, 2019, and 2020. The loan was the lender in New York was found and took on the obligation. So it was, taken out of someone who was actively attempting to take our buildings and put in the hands of a fairly friendly philanthropic foundation. Some real estate that wasn't being used was sold. New managers have been installed at a couple of stations. I don't say that the board is in a state of gridlock. I think sometimes it feels like that when you're on it, because decisions can take a long time because there are different voices and different perspectives, and they all want to be heard. And sometimes when people are coming from 5 different parts of the country, they don't always understand each other real well at the beginning. And so they have to explain to each other what all of their perspectives kind of look like, and you can get tired. But it's not a gridlocked board. It has been a factional board, and we can talk about that, but gridlock is not what the problem is.
So the main issue that the board is facing and they're trying to resolve is how to reduce the debt. Is that mainly it? Is that the main issue?
Well, I talked a bit about some of the transitions that Pacifica has to go through. I talked about, becoming more of an on-demand media outlet, which I think is, incredibly important. There are transitional shifts in terms of audience. The original Pacifica audience, as it were, is now elderly and dying. And the connections of Pacifica to newer generations are much softer and gentler and more fragile. And those connections need to be woven back because the baby boomers will, the remaining baby boomer generation will not be here in 20 years. And Pacifica still needs to be here. There are a number of sort of, serious, significant transitions that have to be made. Pacifica needs to revitalize its news service, which has fallen on hard times, which is problematic for the affiliates, in addition to the stations themselves. So there's a number of things that need to happen. But yes, the finances is certainly one of them. And membership has largely dropped from about 75,000 to less than 50,000 over the last 10 years. And that's not the right trend. It's got to go the other way.
I did go to the website and I was trying to find out how to become a member. Becoming a member now won't entitle anyone to a vote, but still, it's still good to become a member. Is there the option to become a member on the website? I don't see it. How does one become a member?
Yeah, on pacifica.org, you will find almost nothing. That website is not maintained, which is an issue. But if you go to the websites of the individual stations, KPFA, KPFK, KPFT, WBAI, and WPFW, that's where you'll find the opportunity to become a member, to affiliate. So which station is geographically closest to you? Are you in Ventura, or was that somebody else?
I'm in Chicago, actually.
You're in Chicago, yeah. So you would need to pick one of the signal areas to affiliate with. I don't know which one would be most to your liking. You could look at WBAI.org in New York, or you could look at KPFT.org in Houston, or possibly KPFK.org in Los Angeles. That's where you will find the information to affiliate. And it is true that you are not able to vote in this bylaws referendum because it had a date of record that has already passed.
Right. So I could affiliate with any of them and then become a member to vote in the next election if there is any next election, right?
Absolutely, yes.
It is, yeah. You go to Amazon.
Let's go to Sharon.
Hey, Tracy. So Jan is not on the board. Are any of the other 4 on the board of directors presently?
One of them, Lyndon Foley, who is from Texas, and he would be the treasurer for the next 3 years, although he's not currently the treasurer.
And is the board divided? Are they, do we know what the board's thinking, or have they made any kind of statements?
They have. Pacifica has a process with these membership referendums where, for whatever set of reasons, they make all of the local boards and the national boards vote on these things. It doesn't make any difference. The members have the final word, but I guess it's a way for the members to understand how the people that they put into office feel about the proposal. And the national board voted on April 15th, and they voted no by a margin of 16 to 4 to 1. And I believe all of the local boards have voted. 4 out of 5 voted no, and KPFK voted yes by a narrow margin. And KPFK, my station, is part of where a lot of the energy has come for these bylaws referendums. I think that's fair to say.
The thing that I think bothered me about listening to what Jan had to say was the loss of local control of the radio stations, because we're talking about Pacifica being this very unique thing in the broadcasting landscape, in that it is, sort of this, community radio entity, with each station being really representing its own community and the voice of its own community, and getting those voices and those sounds on the airwaves. And having local individuals deciding what their community needed to hear or wanted to hear. Now, I understand that makes things a little more complicated sometimes, but not always. Sometimes that actually simplifies to have the people on the ground making the decisions. And it seems like, from what I understand, the New Day bylaws, as you reiterated, are going to take all that local control away. There will be no local decision-making regarding the stations. It will all come from essentially these 4 individuals, at least in the beginning, and whoever they appoint as the new executive director. And that's terrifying to me as a community radio advocate. I mean, that's the worst thing that could possibly happen for a community, groups and entities and different stations running their own radio stations, suddenly for that power to be taken away and given to 4 individuals that are making these decisions without any input from the community, maybe one individual, on this eventual board. Anyway, it seems like everything against what Pacifica is and what I know Pacifica to be. And it seems to put it in this kind of corporate realm where the decisions are being made by a few top individuals and being sent out all over the country. And the programming then reflects that. So I'm just, I haven't been following this too much until I heard Jan talk. And then that got me really, frightened for the state of community radio as a whole, because these stations are the primary community radio stations in the United States, and what happens to them will filter out towards what happens to us, I think. So how much are the communities aware that their community stations could be taken from them? How much are the members, understanding this, I think, is one question. Is there an education campaign happening? I know New Day has a lot of publicity. It seems like they have big PR people working with them, just looking at their website and their media posts. Is there a campaign to educate the members? Just because I haven't heard much, but admittedly we're a member station, but I'm not personally individually a member. So what's happening for the members? What kind of education are they getting about this?
You said lots of things, Sharon.
I know, I'm sorry. Just be confused at what you want to address.
Yeah. Well, let me start with sort of the opposition campaign. I mean, I hate to be oppositional because I think it's a campaign for Pacifica to continue, not a campaign for Pacifica to stop. But the oppositional campaign to the New Day bylaws, there are two websites. They're both reasonably set up at this point. One is called PacificaFightback.org. That's one word. And the other, which is a newer one, is located at Pacifica-democracy-project.org. And both of those sites have a significant amount of content and are seeking to educate listeners and members on what's going on. You know, it's important to say that it took the New Day folks, I believe they started collecting signatures almost a year ago. So for 12 months, they have been writing to people asking them to sign their petition for this membership referendum. And of course, the opposition was not responding at that point because there was no referendum. It was just an attempt to create one. So there's essentially this sort of 12-month period of, unmatched outreach that will now correct itself in the referendum period. I don't know if it's a good or a bad sign that it took them a long time to get those 5,000 signatures, but it did. It took the better part of a year. In terms of the stuff that you said, Sharon, yeah, there's local control is being removed. And when we talk about local control, we're talking about what sort of GM and PD the station has. Currently, the local board sort of create a pool of candidates, and that would be gone. And also, you know, taking a look at the station's budget and how it spends money. And the problem with sort of, you know, punting all of those things to national, and I can speak to this because I've been a national treasurer and I was on the PNB for a number of years, is that people often know very little about the specific signal areas that they're in. As I talked about, these stations operate very differently. Some have budgets twice the size of others. New York City is in no way the same place as like Houston, Texas. And so the ability to make good decisions for an outlet whose operations you're not familiar with in an area that you may have only visited once or twice is not always that good. I mean, I spent a lot of time explaining to my colleagues who were deciding on various things, you know, what my station was like, because they didn't really know. And I think that also applies more broadly. And right now, at least, for better or worse, you have equal representation on the national board for all station areas. All 5 get 4 representatives each. So they can't basically outvote each other. You know, they all have sort of an equal stake. When you change that, as you will be doing, because the proposed national officers are all west of the Mississippi, you know, Houston 1, Los Angeles 2, KPFA 1. The East Coast stations have 0 representation in the officers. They have none, you know, absolutely none. So you're going to have an unbalanced board. So you're likely to have an awful lot of, you know, disproportionate impact based on how many board members there are, geographical pressures and stresses and tensions in a way that you don't really have now, because some stations are going to have a disproportionate effect on what the national network does and how it does it. And those are going to impact really local decisions at these stations that won't have as many votes as they used to. And I know from the point of view of the New York station, which, was rated just a couple of years ago, they are terrified. And the Washington station, which, a lot of other entities feel should kind of change it, it's formatted various ways. They're stressed out because, that's sort of what happens when you have an imbalance. And this is structured to create an imbalance between the stations on the national board, and to take more of the local decision maker, actually all of the local decision making, and put it into this national board. And I think that's pretty terrifying. And I think it's terrifying for reasons that we can understand. I mean, the affiliates are all community radio stations. So that your local presence as an outlet is important. And the idea that some group of people, 2,000 miles away know how your station should be run sounds kind of weird, right? And this is basically what we're doing to the Pacifica station. And, they may be part of a network in the way that you're not, but they still have a local presence and a local footprint and a local community to serve. That doesn't change. So that was a long answer to everything you said.
Anthony, this is Heather. I just want to.
Oh,
go
let's
ahead.
go
Go ahead,
to Ursula and then Heather.
Okay, thank you.
Heather, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say briefly, Tracy, I wish you'd say something also about this, because the two stations that are being discriminated against in Washington and New York are the predominantly Black stations, or with Black producers and so forth.
Absolutely. I think that is fair to say. And I think it's also fair to say that those stations' workers and constituents, they feel that. And they feel that as racially biased in the New Day bylaws. I think that's completely fair to say.
Yes, thank you. Right. Sorry, Ursula, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, and thank you to both of you for spending this time to give us your point of view. I do have a question that speaks more directly to who we are. One of the things that Jan brought up when she spoke, and it is absolutely correct, is that the way things have developed over the years is that when it came to representation of the affiliates and the affiliate program, the day arrived when Pacifica board members realized that affiliate representatives could be swing votes for whatever faction they were part of. And the practice began of recruiting people as the affiliate directors to be swing votes. Now, this is possible because the Pacifica National Board votes on who is the affiliate director. And this led to catastrophic situation for the affiliate program. Many members of the Pacifica board don't even really understand what the affiliate program is, and had no understanding that there was actually a part of their organization and their management structure that was responsible for maintaining and managing and supporting an affiliate network. And this led to a situation where literally the national organization was able to without any accountability, take thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars from the affiliate program, to the point where we were really at the point of not being able, we would not have existed anymore. And both on financially and in a management structure. And in fact, the day did arrive when I wasn't able to pay my staff because the Pacifica owed us so much money that nobody knew about. Now, this was all possible because nobody really was looking out for the welfare of the affiliate program, because the practice had come into play that Pacifica affiliate directors were more involved with the politics at the Pacifica stations and weren't really focusing on the needs of the affiliate program. Now, we were lucky that we had a board member in the last session who, by kind of a fluke of timing, came on, who was not recruited by any station or any faction, and he did the dirty work of extremely unpleasant work of finally addressing the management problem that the affiliate program needed. He was really the exception to the rule. So my question to you, and if it hadn't been for his work, we would not be here today. Absolutely not. And so my question to you is, Jan had a point that there is really no way of addressing, affiliate representation on the current system. So how would you visualize that in the future? Because it really did kind of run us into the ground. That, we didn't have anybody, because there are management issues here. There's management problems, and there was absolutely no interest in addressing those for years and years and years, and financial issues too.
Mhm. Yeah, it's important to say that New Day is not a solution to that, and it would actually make some changes to the affiliate representation on the national board, which I should mention, so I'll do that. The first is that affiliate representation on the national board would be cut in half. You would go from 2 affiliate directors to just 1. And that's a 50% representation cut, so it's not insignificant. The second thing that would happen is that there would be an association of affiliates, which I guess would be a new 501c3. And my understanding is that it would consist of the dues-paying affiliates, which is a significant chunk of the affiliates, but not, I think, all of them. And that entity and whoever is running it would be picking the one sole affiliate director. Now that's a new system, might work, might not work. You will be having a 50% cut in the representation. And the question of sort of who is encompassed by this new 501c3 would be something that the affiliates would have to figure out. I did speak to the person who started it or talked about it. And at that time, this might have changed. It was only for dues paying affiliates. So a number of, for example, LPFMs or other entities that are grandfathered into the affiliate program and don't pay dues would not be a part of this new association of affiliates. So it would probably be a subsection of the existing affiliate program. I do agree with you that the affiliate directors should be focused on the affiliate program, and some are and some aren't. I do think that changes to how those representatives are chosen, again, could easily be made without necessarily all of the New Day stuff coming along with it. In other words, when there are reasonable changes that should be made in the bylaws, and I think most everyone would agree that the affiliate representatives should represent the affiliates, I don't think those are controversial. And I think that, we're basically getting these complete bylaws rewrites when to some degree, what we need is sort of contained, streamlined amendments that deal with one thing at a time and make it better, which I think you certainly could do. In other words, I don't think that the affiliate representation changes that you're talking about are necessarily off the table. And I don't know that the New Day structure necessarily solves the problems that you're talking about.
Well, how would you recommend accountability? And it is controversial. The executive director opposed the formation of an affiliate unit. So there is controversy.
Well, it's not a union. It's a 501c3 organization that the affiliates are members of. And it's the stations themselves that are the members. So it's not a workers' union in the sense that a union is kind of normally used. I'm not aware of what the executive director, are you talking about the current ED? Because the proposal.
Yeah, she opposed to having an affiliate unit.
Around 2017.
Pardon me?
The proposal for an association of affiliates was made in 2017, so it wasn't the current ED.
Well, no, I'm talking about if the affiliate program had not become a unit of Pacifica, we would not be here today.
Okay, well, that's
that was
not a bylaw thing.
that
That's
was
an internal
controversial.
structure thing. But what I'm
Well,
saying is.
so that's
not a
what I'm
bylaw.
asking you. How would you suggest there be accountability?
Well, I'm just saying that the internal structure of departments within Pacifica is not a function of the bylaws. It doesn't happen under New Day or not happen under the old bylaws. That's a management issue. It does fall under the purview of the ED, not the board. And it's not really related to the bylaws per se. What New Day will give you is if you call it that, is it will give you a 50% cut in the representation on the national board, which has an impact on the affiliates program, but doesn't per se run it. And it would have the sole representative selected by this new 501c3 organization rather than the current system, which, as I understand it, is simply a volunteer system. Now, it's probably true that board members have gone out and recruited people, but any affiliate, any person involved with the affiliate network, they have the support of their station, can volunteer. There
Right,
are
but
no
they can't.
limits,
But they can't be elected to the board. The board elects it, and they elect members according to their preference, which are swing votes.
They elect from the people who make themselves available to be elected.
Right, who are recruited by the board as swing votes.
Well, that's because there are relatively few volunteers from the affiliate network otherwise. I mean, I voted in several of those elections, and at most, I generally had 3 choices for 2 seats. So if that's the only process by which people are stepping up to serve on the Pacifica National Board, then that's what you'll get. But the process is currently open. Anyone affiliated with an affiliate station, like Heather, can put themselves forward. I mean, perhaps Heather was recruited by someone way back when, but that wasn't my impression when she first came on the board. I think she wanted to serve.
Well, the way it has functioned in recent times is that there have been people who were not affiliated with a faction, but they don't get voted. And so there's less and less incentive for people to get involved because they know that they will not get voted in. That has been the trend. And I'm not really, my point isn't really, I mean, how the board decides who they are is kind of beyond my scope, but I'm saying the result of that has been a lack of accountability to the needs of the affiliate program. And that's been a terrible problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think dropping the representation from 2 individuals to 1 individual is going to help you in that regard. But I think that, that's largely about the quality of the folks who, are stepping up to serve in the affiliate program. And if there is sort of, a factional divide impacting who's getting elected and who's not, I think that's, that's largely related to all of this sort of happening without any sort of sunshine. Because honestly, if the Pacifica National Board selections from the affiliates, and when I voted the 4 times that I did, I didn't have too many people to vote from at all. In a lot of cases, there were 2 candidates for 2 seats. I think that, the affiliates can make themselves known that this is who they would like to represent them. And I think that would be taken seriously by the board. I don't recall that I ever got any input into who the affiliates wanted to represent them. I do think that if there's an association of affiliates, that entity can certainly recommend.
They did, and their members were not voted in.
Well, no, there was no association of affiliates.
No, there was. The
What are you talking
association nominated some people.
Who nominated?
The Association of Affiliates.
The association was just set up a little while ago. What
It
year
was set up prior to
are
the
you
last
talking
election.
about?
It was set up prior to the last election.
And they recommended some people and the board
Yes.
didn't take it seriously. Well, then that should be publicized, and the people who are on the Pacifica National Board should be held to account. because they should be putting people on the board that the Association of
Right,
Affiliates.
so no, and I understand. So what I mean, I'm really asking you, how would you see that happening? What's your vision for how you would make people accountable? It's an honest question. This is not a gotcha question. It's really a serious question that I have, because it practically sank the affiliate program, this problem.
Well, I think you're connecting things that aren't necessarily connected. The issue of the internal management really largely is a function of the executive director, not a function of the national board. But that said, I would be open to a bylaws amendment if the Association of Affiliates works for all of the affiliates, and I'm not sure of that. Is everybody on this call members of it? Are you all participating? Or is it just some affiliates? Are you aware of the Association of Affiliates? Okay,
I don't
well,
quite understand what you mean.
Good question.
Well, Ursula is saying there's an association of affiliates that is recommending candidates to be on the Pacifica National Board. And I was just wondering if as affiliates, you were participating in that 501c3 organization, you knew who was being recommended to be on the national board on your behalf or not. And it sounds like the answer is no.
This is a separate 501c3 than the affiliates program itself?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, Ursula, I think there's your issue. I mean, if there's multiple members of the affiliates program who don't know there's an association of affiliates, then who's making these recommendations? And, I'm not sure that the solution being proposed is a solution, because if the person's going to be representing Sharon and the other person who spoke from Chicago, and they don't know who they are, and they don't know that they recommended them, then something's not connected.
Right, but I understand that, Tracy. What I'm really, and again, I'm sincerely, this is not a gotcha question. What do you see as a way to deal with that? I'm not asking you really to endorse the affiliate association. I'm asking you, how do you see handling a problem like that? It's been a question that we struggled with for years.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's a sincere question.
It's difficult. I mean, if you want to use an association of affiliates model, then I think you need full participation from the affiliates. And maybe that's in process and it just hasn't happened yet because it's new.
Yeah.
And I certainly think that those recommendations could potentially become binding on the national board. And I don't think you need to adopt the New Day bylaws to start that conversation. But I think that there needs to be, I don't want to say accountability, but there needs to be participation in that association by the full gamut of affiliates, or it's just another interest group. And I think it will be perceived as such. So if you want it to be perceived as the actual voice of the affiliates, then A, they all need to be members. And B, there needs to be some endorsement process that is transparent, because I think otherwise it just comes across as another interest group that's not so different than the interest groups that have been weighing in on this before. And the other
the chat
scenario
says, why not
is
just have the affiliates directly elect 2 directors?
Potentially that could work.
Yeah,
I mean,
but there is a, I mean, I don't want to get off in the weeds here, but that is problematic too, because not all our affiliates share the Pacifica mission. And I think you really want to think twice before you create a system where clients begin to sit on the board of directors if they don't have a consistent mission with the foundation itself. I mean, my job is to look after the interests of Pacifica too. And the point of the association was that this would be a group of people who are accountable to the Pacifica mission. Now, the fact that people don't know them is kind of neither here nor there, because I would bet nobody on this call either knows how the current board members, who they are and how they got there either. You know, like how did that happen? There's just kind of, it's an interesting gray area because I don't think Pacifica wants its affiliates to become like a, you know, there's just a lot of affiliates who don't have the Pacifica mission. And I couldn't imagine them really having a place on the Pacifica board because it's, you know, it's not their wheelhouse. They buy programs from us, they cooperate with us, but they do not share a mission. And I think you do want people on the board who have at least gone through some sort of vetting process that they are compliant with the organization whose board they're going to sit on. You know, so that was the point of the association. And I'm not advocating for them. I'm just saying the reason that was created because there's an accountability there with their mission. But I'm not saying it's the only way to do it. I'm sincerely asking for other suggestions on how you would do that.
No, I think you're right. I think there is an accountability problem, or certainly at least a communication and a representation problem that has existed. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think you're right that it's a gray area. The affiliated stations represent all kinds of stations in all kinds of individual situations. And they probably don't all speak with one voice in quite the way that one might think. On the other hand, I think the affiliate perspective is really valuable to Pacifica. And there's a reason why those seats are on the board. And I don't necessarily advocate eliminating them.
Yeah, I mean, you know, part of the Pacifica struggle is people ended up on the board that really shouldn't have been there, right? I mean, that's the history we all share.
Oh, sure.
And there's a tremendous, you know,
are not by themselves in that.
Right. And so, you know, there's a lot of people. I mean, the affiliate stations involve more than 200 stations. There's a lot of different types of people involved. And many of them don't have Pacifica's mission. That's nothing against them, but it's not their wheelhouse. It's not what they do.
Yeah, you kind of hope that if people aren't focused that way, that they wouldn't step up for these positions, they wouldn't vote, but it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah,
you know,
it
that's
doesn't always
the
work that way.
natural selection process, and it
Yeah.
can fail.
Yeah, well, I don't want to hijack the conversation. It's just a question that, you know, we've struggled with for years. And I was curious, you know, how you see that, because with the lack of accountability, we were almost destroyed.
Yeah, and that should never have happened, and it's awful. Okay,
Trudy has a question.
You have to work on it. Yeah.
And then Sharon.
Okay, did you say me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. First of all, Tracy, when you spoke about that that conflict in 1999 and then 2009, what was the issue? Were they both relatively the same issues? And then how would the bylaws both affect that, a repeat of what happened then? Could you describe a little bit more clearly, because I know nothing about that, and I'm sure that a lot of affiliates are like me. They're not that clear on the history. If you could describe briefly really what happened and how those two incidents were connected and how those two incidents could repeat now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
The good old days.
Complicated question. Yeah, Ursula is going to be like, I could write a book. But I'll try to summarize a bit. And, you know, Ursula, I'm going to leave stuff out because, you know, how can you? But to
I went to jail.
So did I.
I did not like jail.
Ursula was active with the Pacifica Campaign, which was the WBAI end of the struggle, and I was active with the KPFA end of the struggle. So 3,000 miles away. We were both going to jail. Oh my God. So I think that it's fair to say that back in 1999, you sort of had the sort of, you know, dramatic end of what was at least a 10-year long trend of a kind of centralization Pacifica had always had, since its founding in 1946, a self-appointed board. But as time goes by, you know, people appoint people who appoint people who appoint people, and you get further and further from kind of the core of folks who had started the organization and understood it, right? Because you get 5 or 6 generations of board members out from sort of your original core group. So there definitely started to be some changes in how the board saw the organization, what they wanted it to be, what they thought was most important about it. Additionally, Pacifica had always had really active CABs, or community advisory boards. And for a long time, it had been the policy in Pacifica to have new board members kind of vetted by those community advisory boards. And, you know, and that provided sort of a level of attention to who was placed on the national board. And in the 90s, for various political reasons, the foundation was told that no, those local boards shouldn't be vetting board members. And the national board took that advice, and they basically threw the local boards overboard, and they just started appointing people within the very narrow circle of their friends and acquaintances, which sort of left the signal areas that supported the stations kind of frozen out in the cold. So what essentially happened was that an email was leaked of some board members, you know, chatting about basically selling stations, putting them up for sale, and reinvesting the money in various kinds of ways. Apparently, at some point, KPFA was on the block, and WBAI was on the block, and a lot of internal protesting went on, including on the air, and in the way of sort of, you know, tin hat despots everywhere. The national board reacted to all of those angry listeners and angry programmers by going nuclear and shutting stations down. So KPFA became a target. WBAI had an abrupt management change and all kinds of other stuff. And as Ursula has said, you know, each station in turn basically came in for the treatment. And it was too much. You know, the community radio community rebelled and went through a multi-year process to essentially get into a position to be able to kick that board out and to be able to elect a new one, and to never be in a situation where we couldn't vote out a national board if they pissed us off too much. I mean, that's basically what the premise of it was. We wanted to recall them, but we didn't have those rights as members, so we had to create them because they were in those positions and we couldn't get them out no matter what they did. In 2019, having come full circle almost 20 years later, as I said, an executive director, you know, took it upon themselves to basically say, even though it is Pacifica's, you know, commission to operate these stations, that they didn't want to operate the New York station anymore. So same thing, station was shut down, raided, employees kicked out, programming piped in. What was different was that the station's local community went to court, and they were able to because they had standing as members of the organization to say, we're not, you know, we're not taking this. This person had no authority or ability to do this, and we want the court to reverse it. And that's exactly what the Supreme Court did in New York. It's called the Supreme Court. It's the equivalent of Superior Court most anywhere else. But that's what they did. They basically said that the executive director acted what you would call ultra vires, without the proper authority, because there was never a formal national board vote. They just did it, and they told the board later, and that's not okay. So I guess the sort of, you know, the parallel between the two situations, which is what you asked for, is basically sort of kind of the, you know, the tin hat dictator type of tactics. And to some degree, you know, the pitting of one station to be sort of a scapegoat for the system's problems. If we just shut down KPFA, everything will be okay. If we just shut down BAI, everything will be okay. In terms of the bylaws revisions and how it would impact that, I think that was the other part of your question, if I have it right.
Yes.
Yeah, there's not really a direct connection. It's probably helpful to say that the 4 folks that New Day would install as the officers were on the record at the time in support of the BAI takeover. I believe, I'm sorry, 3 of the 4. Sharon Kyle, who was never on the boards, has said that she didn't think that was something she would have supported. So it's 75%. You know, which suggests that this kind of activity could happen again. I think it's fair to say that. But basically what these bylaws are going to do is they're going to weaken those local ties and your functional local board. It was the local board in BAI that went to court and that basically said, look, we've been elected by the members to represent the station, and they were recognized as a legal entity that had the right to kind of do that, to uphold the members' rights. And if you wipe out local boards, then you're basically going to have a situation where the national board is fairly free to take these kinds of activities, and you don't really have a local board structure to protect the station. So I think that's certainly one, you know, one connection, and you will have a larger percentage of appointed board members who, you know, will be picked by the existing board. So you'll have some of the dynamics that Ursula was talking about with the affiliate directors of board members, you know, putting people on the board that they think will support them and what they want to do. I think that's kind of human nature when you appoint people. You don't want to appoint people that are going to contradict you all the time. You probably should, but people tend not to do that. And so it is basically, as I said, it's a more centralized structure with less representation that's more likely to pit stations against each other. You know, sort of an argument. You know, it's sort of like streamlining in disguise. Yes, you'll be streamlining certain things, but at the cost of giving up a whole bunch of stuff, including local control, direct accountability, affiliate representation at 2 rather than 1, you know, significant staff representation. Pacifica's national board is now 20% staff. That would drop to a much smaller percentage, and, you know, equilateral representation of all the signal areas.
Also, you were talking about accountability. So was this the accountability that you were referencing, that you wanted to make sure that what happens, whoever is responsible is accountable for what happens? And then how, yeah. So in other words, it seems as if this election doesn't address accountability at all. And what is the next step to facilitate accountability? What could we do?
Well, can I respond to that real quick, Tracy?
Sure.
The answer to you, as far as I'm concerned, Trudy, is yes and no. First of all, my experience with the struggle that happened in 1999 and 2000 and 2001 did have very different qualities from what happened with BAI recently. I'm not defending what happened BAI recently, but from the information, you know, from the involvement that I had back in 2000, that turned out to be pretty clearly a takeover from an external interest. Seemed to come quite a bit from the US government. as a takeover from the outside. I mean, the people that were introduced and the way they went about doing it was very much an external takeover. I think what happened recently with BAI is a little bit more complex than that. I'm not defending it, but I'm saying I don't believe that it had the elements of an organized takeover, which went all the way up to the CPB. I mean, they were planning to put Colin Powell on the board. I mean, it was a clearly orchestrated takeover that involved many parties and quite frankly, a lot of the Democratic Party. And but so my answer to you is yes and no. I do feel that accountability to the Pacifica mission is a concern because of the lessons we learned from that takeover, that you can't bring in people, you know, the people that were put on the board in 1999, they were union busters, they were people that sold radio stations, they were, you know, real estate, they were people who were there basically to take apart Pacifica Network. That was clearly their role there. And the more we learned about them, and you know, they got the CPB to lie, you know, on their behalf, and it was a very complicated scheme that, you know, that had really, really deep waters. But the upshot of it is that yes, it did raise the really serious issue of, if you're going to put people on the Pacifica board, it would be really, really important for them to be in compliant with the Pacifica mission, because that was clearly you know, what happened in 1999 was a clear violation of the Pacifica mission. But my issue of accountability has been more complicated in the last few years, because the majority of people in Pacifica don't really understand what the affiliate program is. They don't understand that there is a part of their own organization that runs the affiliate program, and feel no accountability to it. And because of that, you know, we basically were treated as a slush fund for many, many years, with absolutely no power to manage ourselves properly. And so that was a different type of accountability that went on for years and years. Now, you know, fortunately, Robin took it upon himself to really fight the fight for a unit, and, you know, Heather helped him. And now that we are a unit, there is a management and financial accountability. But, you know, these things always need, you know, you always need people there who understand the impact of that. You know, that this is a management and financing issue that needs to be taken seriously. And there will be other, you know, there will be other issues, you know, you know, recently we lent money to a radio station in the network, and we don't know where that, you know, that money is not coming back to us. So, you know, there's always, you want to have, you know, board members who are vigilant, who understand that you need somebody to, you know, hold the foundation accountable to the interests of one of their units at this point. Do you understand does that make sense to you?
Yes, a little bit better, but how did those board members in 1999, how did they get on the board? And then could something like that happen now, that people who are not for the mission of Pacifica get on the board? How did they get on the board?
Well, in 1999, it was very interesting. It was uncovered eventually. I mean, this is like a mystery novel that nobody has ever really completely solved, because there's so many lawsuits involved, and, you know, but it was eventually discovered that an arrangement was made between, I think, the CPB and the Pacifica board, that, you know, it was falsely stated that the local station boards need to be severed from the national board, and then the board made itself self-selecting, and they just started putting people on. Well, you know, this also kind of explains the sensitivity that, you know, Tracy's expressing about, once again, board, you know, local station boards being severed from the board. That's a real sore point for Pacifica, you know, right, Tracy? I mean, historically, that's a red flag, because it happened during the Pacifica struggle.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to say that the board was always, you know, nominally self-appointing throughout Pacifica's history until 1999. But for a significant period of that time, the recommendations of the local boards, the vetting that they did, was taken kind of seriously, and then that shifted. But, you know, this often happens under a disguise. It's important to say that the chair of the Pacifica board, when all these bad things were happening in 1999, was the former head of the US Commission on Civil Rights, Mary Frances Berry, and she put her name on this process. And I mean, anyone in their right mind would have said, of course, the former chair of the US Commission on Civil Rights, Mary Frances Berry, should be on the Pacifica board, right? It's an honor. So,
But it kind of went that way, yeah.
Well, anybody would have. So part of the problem with, you know, a self-appointing type of structure is that, is that, you know, people can look like they're the kind of people that should be on the board, and yet when they get on there, they don't do the right things. I mean, certainly Mary Frances Berry was a very impressive face to put on what, you know, turned out to be, as Ursula put it, a takeover.
A takeover, yeah.
But you wouldn't have recognized it or kind of seen it coming. And I think the idea with meshing the strands of accountability through these local boards so that people have to run for election on their local board. They have to get elected, then they have to serve on that local board for at least 1 year before they can even try to get onto the national board. And then all the people on the local board have to choose them as one of the people they want to send to the national board. Even though it's kind of like a spider web, that spider web is a defense against sort of the Mary Frances Berry phenomenon. That's how it was kind of put together. And it was put together to discourage someone who looks good just sweeping in and taking power, because that's what happened. And I think if you're in a situation again where, you know, someone of that eminence walked over and said, make me the board chair of Pacifica, if you didn't have a democratic web, people would say, sure, yes, absolutely, thank you for helping us, and then it would be too late. So I think it is illustrative of the fact that even though it can be kind of a ponderous kind of system, there's a kind of checks and balances involved in it, because nobody like Mary Frances Berry would ever want to go through that system in order to take power. And they would.
Yeah, and in answer to the other part of your question, Trudy, that's also what makes it complicated for, you know, for anybody in the affiliate network to be on the board without some sort of vetting process, because you know, when people become affiliates to Pacifica, we don't ask them to sign a loyalty oath to us. We recognize them as independent organizations. We don't ask them what their mission is or anything like that. We don't expect them to be like Pacifica. That's very, very basic to the affiliate program, that we do not ask those questions. On the other hand, if they're going to be on the board, that's a different issue. And there is this sensitivity that comes from the struggle, which was very, very serious situation. I mean, there were really people on there that should not have been on there. You know, what is the barrier to somebody just showing up again and being planted there by God knows who, because clearly these were government plants at the time. So it was a question, you know, way back in 2002 when the bylaws were written, you know, like, what do we do about that problem? You know, how do you create a system of accountability so that the affiliates wanted to be represented, and they should be, but how do you do it in a way so that you still protect the mission of Pacifica? And it was a question that, you know, kind of remained unresolved for years.
Yeah, and I think that it still is. And not to shift the conversation away from the affiliates for just a second, I think one of the roles of the local boards for the 5 Pacifica stations is to some degree that vetting. With all of the things that are bad about those boards, that is one thing that they do.
Right, but the affiliate program has never really resolved that. And we've paid a huge price for it, because over time, people on the national board realized that and began to see it as a place for swing votes instead of serious representative for the affiliate program. And, you know, there's a tremendous lack of understanding. Because the Pacifica stations are so all-consuming in their problems, there's a tendency to forget that there's other parts of the organization that need support.
Well, I spend less time on Pacifica politics than I used to, Ursula, but that sounds like something that needs some work. So maybe we can work on it. I mean, I don't have an immediate answer, but there should be one.
Yeah.
And maybe we should talk about it some more, in other words.
Yeah, well, I think the Affiliate Association is one attempt at that. Now, they've said that they wanted to defer to Pacifica's board's process, so they didn't, you know, I think, Stephanie, you asked them if they would make a presentation, and they said they preferred to wait to see which way the Pacifica board went, because they didn't want to interfere. They didn't, not because they're trying to hide, they just don't want to interfere with another process. And, you know, yeah.
It's possible that that association plays a role. I mean, I didn't mean to say that I think the Association of Affiliates is bad. I'm just was saying that I didn't think having the sole representation on the national board picked by that organization, that right now that was fully hatched in terms of how that would happen. That's what I was trying to say. And it's not fully hatched is the answer.
I see that we're heading towards 5 o'clock. Tracy, you've been so generous with your time.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy.
We have one more question from Sharon, though I don't know, would that be okay if we did one more?
It's okay by me.
Okay, super.
Maybe it's kind of a concluding question. I think that what I'm hearing is that many people are dissatisfied with the way Pacifica runs right now, or what's happening with Pacifica, what it's done to the affiliates program. So many people they just want change, and they want something different. So the New Day group has stepped in and they said, we're going to do something different, even though, in my opinion, none of what they're saying they're going to do different is going to solve any of the direct problems that are in the organization. So I guess my question is there a third option, or is this referendum already been written? Is the text already there? Or is there a way for the current board to say, you know, if you keep it the way it is, these are the, you know, all the things we've been discussing, are they presenting anything that they're going to do if the bylaws remain the same that will, you know, improve the organization? And you know what I'm saying?
Well, the first thing to say is that for various reasons, these referendums are cast in stone. By the time they go to the members, you literally cannot change one word of what you're presented with. And that's frustrating, because you may feel that some ideas are good and some ideas are bad, but that's not anything that you can use. You just have to take it as it is, yes or no. So you better like it if you vote yes. You better like all of it, because you're getting all of it. In terms of a third option, I think that would have been on the table. I mean, people need to understand that Pacifica just finished with a bylaws referendum in March of 2020, which was not very long ago. And now we're having another one in June of 2021. And, you know, basically Bylaws 2 started collecting signatures 5.5 minutes after Bylaws 1 was defeated. And that sort of pace is, I think, very much designed to keep alternatives off the table. I do think that there are some very specific bylaws changes that have been suggested, including reducing the size of the boards without all this other gobbledygook attached to it. Ursula brought up some stuff about the affiliates. There are a number of things regarding the right of recall that I would change from some hard-earned personal experience. There are a number of sections of the bylaws that don't need to be there because they're duplicates of the California Corporations Code. That's why you get to 47 pages. You write a bunch of stuff that's already in the state code that you don't need to have in your bylaws. I think that there are a number of, I could probably write, 8 to 10 independent bylaws revisions that probably wouldn't be that controversial. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. That sort of could be put forward. But unfortunately, once a referendum is put on the table, everything freezes until that referendum is voted up or down. So that's where we've been. And I think, people should understand there's lots of alternatives. And I would like to see a lot of these ideas put out as sort of one-up ideas, so that rather than an entire set of revised bylaws where you have to take everything all at once, like it or not, that you know, these things come in pieces and parts so that people can select the ones that they think make sense. And if they don't like one so much, they can say, they can throw that part out. I think that is a much more logical way to revise your bylaws than this sort of, you know, take all of my ideas at once without any changes. And because I think that creates a situation where people are either voting yes, just because they think any change is better than no change, as you said, or they're voting no because part of it they don't like. I mean, for me, there are enough parts that I don't like that I could never vote yes, if I haven't made that clear. But I would rather be in a situation where if there are 1 or 2 or 3 parts of the New Day bylaws that I think are decent ideas, I could endorse those and throw the rest out. And I think that we have to have that kind of iterative kind of bylaws process. Because there's a lot that's good in the bylaws that were written and went into effect in 2003. Like we talked about, they're there for a reason because of some bad things that happened that we wanted to never, ever happen again. And we don't want to throw all of that out with the bathwater. That said, over 20 years, you figure out that some things that sounded good on paper are actually kind of ponderous and awkward when you try to do them in real life. And those things can be changed. But again, we need to sort of, you know, take that iterative process, you know, rather than these sort of blunt force, I would call them, bylaws revisions. And I thought after the first one went down by 2-to-1 vote, that's what would happen. And somehow it didn't.
Okay.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you. This has been
But it
very
may now, if this one goes down. Maybe, that's my hope.
Thank you, Tracy, for walking us through many complicated issues and taking your time. I really appreciate it.
Sure, thank you so much for inviting me. And if people, you know, have other questions that come up, I'll just leave you my email account. I'm, you know, happy to chat. It's tracyrose@gmail.com.
Okay, fantastic. Do you guys want, I'll put that in the thing here.
Yeah. And,
Stephanie, this is Heather. I just
Yes.
want to thank Tracy as well. Thank you, Tracy, so much. And for this. And Ursula, thanks also for talking about the affiliate program too. I look forward to talking more about that also. So,
Yeah, thank you to both of you.
but thanks, Tracy.
It was great talking to you all. And Ursula, if you want to bat around some ideas about the affiliate representation in, you know, as part of that iterative process that I'm hoping for, we should do that. Maybe we can come up with something that would work better, because the protection of the affiliate program is really important.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for a wonderful meeting. And we'll see you again next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Good night, everybody.